Good evening, all of you. Welcome to Ashok IT. In the last session, we had discussion related to what is the DevOps and what is cloud computing. DevOps is a culture which is used to deliver the projects to the client quickly. So we can say DevOps means set of practices. The main aim of the DevOps to make sure development and operations are happening collaboratively. Right. In the project, development team will be available to develop the project based on the given requirements. Operations team will be available to deliver the project to the client. If development and operations teams works collaboratively, then we can deliver the project to the client quickly. The main aim of the DevOps culture is to reduce the total time it is taking for software development lifecycle. All right. Now, in order to deliver a project to the client, we need to set up some infrastructure. In order to deliver a project to the client, we need to set up some infrastructure. What kind of infrastructure we need? We need a computer. So it's one computer is not sufficient, guys. We need to take multiple computers to set up the infrastructure required for our application. And we need to purchase the servers to run our application. So we have to purchase the servers. We have to purchase the computers. And to keep these servers and we need to install these servers in the computers, and to keep these computers we need one room that is called as server room. Okay, now once we take a room, in that room we are going to set up our computers. For the computers we need a network. Internet connection is required, so we need to set up the network for our computers. After that, we need to have a power for our computers. Electricity is required to run our computers. And electricity backup is also required because our computers should run 24/7. If there is any power cut, our server should not stop, because in servers our applications are going to run. If power is not available, our computers will shut down, then our servers will stop, our applications will not run. When we are doing a business, your application should run 24/7. That means if there is a power loss, power cut also, your computer should not stop working. For that, we need to have power backup. And as multiple computers are running for 24/7, there is a chance of getting heat for those computers. To cool down them, we need to set up air conditioner in our room. That is, in the server room, AC is required. And for our application, we need a database also. We need to purchase the database server required for our application. We are purchasing the computers, we are purchasing the servers, we are setting the network, we are setting up the power backup, ACs. And in order to do all this configuration setup, like network setup, power setup, server setup, database setup, configurations, we need to recruit some employees also on salary basis. We need to pay the salary to those people who are working with our infrastructure. Those are called as administrators. And to protect our server room, we need to have a security guard also. He will be monitoring our server room. He should not allow everybody to inside that server room. So all these things we have to do on our own if you want to run the application. So this is called as infrastructure setup. If you go for this infrastructure setup, there are some challenges available. You have to purchase everything required for our application. You have to purchase everything that is required for our application. Right. Now, in order to purchase, we have to spend huge money and we have to spend time also. We need to focus on application development as well as application infrastructure. If you are focusing on the infrastructure, you cannot concentrate on the development. If you are concentrating on the development, you cannot focus on the infrastructure. And it is costly and a time-taking process. Setting up application infrastructure is a costly operation and it is time-taking process. Instead of we are purchasing and setting up the infrastructure, we can take the help of cloud providers. Whatever the infrastructure that is required for your application, there are some cloud providers available in the market who will provide you that infrastructure. Who are the cloud providers available in the market? AWS, Azure, GCP, like that there are several cloud providers are available in the market. What those cloud providers are doing? Cloud providers are available in the market to provide infrastructure for rent on pay-as-you-go model. It is like a postpaid bill. You use the services from the cloud provider and you pay the money for what you use. That is called pay as you go model. Now, I have given a simple scenario. When there is a function in our house, we need some chairs and tables for our relatives. We are not going to purchase them, but we will take them for rent. We need that material for only 2 days. After the function completed, we will return them to the owner. Similarly, in order to set up our application, whatever the computers, servers, databases, network, power, storage, whatever is required for our application configuration, for our application setup, all these things we can take for rent from the cloud providers. That is called as cloud computing. So what is cloud computing? Providing on-demanded IT resources over the internet is called as cloud computing. Providing on-demanded IT resources over the internet is called as cloud providing. There are cloud computing. There are several cloud providers are available in the market to provide resources over internet. So who are the cloud providers? AWS is one famous cloud provider. Azure is one cloud provider. GCP, one cloud provider. Salesforce, one cloud provider. What these providers are doing, they are providing computing power, network, security, storage, servers, infrastructure. Whatever the infrastructure required for our application, we can take those things, we can take the infrastructure from cloud providers for rent. The process of using infrastructure through internet is called as cloud computing. There are companies who are providing the infrastructure for rent through internet. That is called as cloud computing. As part of our course, we are going to learn AWS to use cloud services. In our course, we are going to learn AWS to use cloud services. By using AWS cloud, we are going to set up the infrastructure in order to run our application. By using AWS cloud services, we are going to set up the infrastructure required for our application. Okay, now let's try to understand what is the architecture of the application, how the infrastructure setup will be done for the application in the real time. We are talking about application. What is that application? How that application is running in the market? Let's try to understand. Application architecture. Right. Tomorrow, when you go for a company, here you can see development team. In the project, development team will be available to develop the project. Now, development team is responsible to write the code for client requirements. That is called as development. In the project, development team will be available. Development team is responsible to write the code for client given requirements. Okay. Next one. Testing team will be available. Testing team is responsible to test the code. Testing team will be available. Testing team is responsible to test the code which is developed by developers, which is done by developers. Test the code which is done by developers. Right? Whatever the code the developers have implemented, is that code is working as expected or not. So development team is responsible to write the code for client given requirements. Testing team is responsible to test the code which is done by developers. Testers will verify application functionality is working as expected as per client expectation or not. As per client expectation or not. That is the duty of the testers. Testing team is responsible to test the code which is done by the developers. Testers will verify application functionality is working as per client expectations or not. Okay, we no need to deal with those two things, guys. We are not going to become a developer. We are not going to become a tester. Now you are doing this course, DevOps with AWS. You will be called as operations team member. Operations team is responsible. Operations team is responsible to build and deliver to build. Operations team is responsible to build, deploy, and deliver project to client. As a DevOps engineer, you are going to perform operations required for the project. Okay, how many teams are going to work in the company, guys? Development team will be available. Testing, before the development team, one more team will be available. Functional team is responsible to gather requirements from the client. We will have functional team. Functional team is responsible to gather requirements or to collect requirements from the client. To collect requirements from the client. Once a functional team collected the requirements from the client, developers and testers are going to analyze the requirements. Then development team is responsible to write the code for client given requirements. These developers will develop the project. Developers will develop the project by writing the code, either by using Java or by using .NET or by using Python. They will write the code to develop the project. So how they will write that code? Based on the client requirement. They will understand the client requirement and they are going to write the code for the project development. Developers are responsible to develop the project. If developers want to develop the code, they need to understand the requirement. Who is going to collect the requirements here in the project? Functional team will be available for every project. Those functional team members will communicate with the client and the functional team is going to collect the requirements from the client. Functional team will collect the requirements from the client and the functional team will give the requirements to developers and testers. Developers and testers are going to understand the requirements and they are going to ask some doubts on the functionality to get the clarifications. Once they got the complete clarity on the requirement, developers are going to develop the code. Once the development is completed, testers are going to test the code. Developers completed the coding, but whether that code is working as client expected, as per the client expectation, is it working as per the given requirements or not? That thing will be verified by testers in the project. Okay, functional team is available, development team is available, testing team is available. Then who will deploy the project into server? How the project will be deployed to server? Who will deliver the project to the server? That's where operational team comes into picture. What is the duty of the operations team? Operations team is responsible to build, deploy, and deliver project to client. Now, after learning this DevOps with AWS, you are going to become operations team member. Okay. After learning DevOps with AWS, you will become operations engineer, application related operations engineer. Application operations engineer. So what would be your role? What would be your role if you know the DevOps? If you know the DevOps, then what would be your role in the company, guys? What you are going to become after this course? All of you able to see my notepad, whatever I'm typing? All of you able to see my notepad, what I'm typing? Yes or no? Right. Now, what you will become after learning the DevOps? What you are going to become after learning the DevOps? Are you going to become a developer? Are you going to become a tester? What you will become after learning the DevOps? You are going to become operations engineer. You are going to become application operations engineer. What are the roles and responsibilities of operations engineer? Roles and responsibilities of operations engineer. Okay, DevOps engineer is also called as operations engineer. DevOps engineer is called as operations engineer. DevOps engineer will be called as DevOps engineer. DevOps engineer is called as operations engineer. That means as a DevOps engineer, you are going to perform operations required for the application. As a DevOps engineer, As a DevOps engineer, you will perform operations required for the application. You will perform operations required for the application. Sir, what type of operations will be available? We will try to understand them. Okay. As a DevOps engineer, you will perform operations required for the application. Functional team is responsible to collect requirements from the client. Development team is responsible to develop the code for the requirements. Testing team is to verify the code is working as per the given requirement or not. Operations team is responsible to build, deploy, and deliver project to the client. Build, and this is also called as release team. Operations team is also called as release team. DevOps engineer is called as operational engineer, operations engineer. As a DevOps engineer, you will perform operations required for the application. DevOps team members are also called as release team members. In some projects, in some companies, DevOps team is also called as release team. Is also called as release team. What is the meaning of release team? Release team is responsible to release the project to the client. Release team is responsible to release project to the client. That means delivery, deployment and delivery, deploy and deliver. Deploy and deliver. That is the duty of the DevOps engineer in the project. Now tell me, do you need to know programming to become a DevOps engineer? Do you need to know programming to become a DevOps engineer? Guys, tell me, what is your duty in the company? What is your duty in the company? What is your duty in the company? Are you going to develop the code? Are you going to test the code? As a DevOps engineer, what is your duty? As a DevOps engineer, what is your duty? Come on. As a DevOps engineer, what is your duty? Your duty is to deliver the project to the client. So who is developing the project? Developers are developing the project. Testers are testing the project. Testers are testing the project. DevOps engineers are responsible to deliver the project. DevOps engineers are responsible to deliver the project, deploy and deliver the project. DevOps engineer roles and responsibilities. Roles and responsibilities of DevOps engineer. Roles and responsibilities of the DevOps engineer. What you are going to do? Set up infrastructure. Set up infrastructure required to run our application. Set up infrastructure required to run our application. Okay. Take the code which is done by developers. Build that code using build tool. Build the code using build tools. Build the code using build tools. There is a tool called Maven. Take the code which is done by developers from repository. There may be a repository called GitHub or Bitbucket. Developers will write the code and the developers are going to keep that code into a repository. Set up the infrastructure required to run our application. Nothing but set up servers, database, load balancer, etc. So this kind of environment setup will be done by DevOps engineer. Set up the infrastructure required to run our application. What is the meaning of setting up the infrastructure? They need to take the computers, they need to take the servers, they need to set up the database, they need to set up the load balancer. All this infrastructure setup should be done by DevOps engineer. After that, take the code which is done by the developers from source code repository. All the developers are going to write the code. They will store the code into one location that is called as repository. Some projects will use GitHub repositories. Some projects will use Bitbucket repository. Go for GitHub repository or Bitbucket repository. Take the code. Once you have taken the code, build the code using build tools using Maven. Using build tools using Maven. Deploy the code into servers. Deploy the code into servers using CI/CD tool. Using CI/CD tool like Jenkins, or udeploy, etc. There are several deployment tools are available in the market. One of the famous deployment tool is Jenkins. One of the famous deployment tool is there, which is called Jenkins. Deploy the code into servers using CI/CD tools like Jenkins, udeploy, etc. Deliver project to the client. Deliver project to the client. After the deployment, deliver project to the client. These are roles and responsibilities of DevOps engineer in the company. You need to set up the infrastructure that is required to run our application. That means you need to set up the servers, you need to set up the database, you need to set up the load balancer. Take the code which is done by the developers from source code repository. Build the code using build tools. We are going to use a Maven or Gradle as a build tool. Maven or Gradle as a build tool. Deploy the code into servers using CI/CD tools like Jenkins and udeploy. Once it is completed, then deliver project to the client. These are roles and responsibilities of the DevOps engineer. Okay, now let us see what is application architecture. What is application architecture? Before going to understand application architecture, can you see who is going to do what in the company? Can you please read these points once for better understanding? Can you read these points for better understanding? Functional team is responsible to collect requirements from the client. Requirements from the client. Functional team will be available for every project. They will collect requirements from the client. Development team is responsible to write the code for client given requirements. Developers will develop the project by using programming languages. By using programming languages. By using programming language, either Java or .NET or Python. There are so many programming languages are available. By using any one of the language, they are going to develop the project. Then what is the duty of the testing team? Testing team is responsible to test the code which is done by the developers. Testers will verify the application functionality is working as per client expectations or not. Okay, operations team is responsible to build, deploy and deliver project to the client. After learning the DevOps, you will become application operations engineer. You are going to call as operations engineer. DevOps engineer is also called as operations engineer. As a DevOps engineer, you will perform operations required for the application. DevOps team is also called as release team in the company. What is the meaning of release team? Release team is responsible to release project to the client. That means these people are responsible to deploy and deliver project to the client. Okay. Now, once you join in the company as a DevOps engineer, what are your roles and responsibilities in the company? Your roles and responsibilities, nothing but you need to set up the infrastructure required to run the application. Guys, tell me, are we going to purchase the infrastructure and we going to set up, or we are going to use a cloud provider to get the infrastructure? Nowadays, companies are purchasing the infrastructure. Companies are using cloud computing to get the infrastructure for rent. Come on. Why we are going for cloud? Why we are going for cloud? Why we are not purchasing the infrastructure? Why we are going for cloud? If you go for cloud, easily you can access the infrastructure from the internet. If you want 10 servers, within 5 minutes you can take 10 servers from the cloud. Cloud providers are available in the market to provide you resources on demand basis. If you want, you take it, use it, pay for that. That is called pay as you go model. So what are the cloud providers? Who are the cloud providers in the market which are famous? AWS is one cloud provider, Azure is one cloud provider, GCP is one cloud provider, Salesforce is one cloud provider. Nowadays, people are not interested to purchase the infrastructure because setting up the infrastructure on our own is costly and a time-taking process. That's the reason we are going to use cloud computing. What is cloud computing? Providing on-demanded IT resources over the internet is called as cloud computing. Now, as a DevOps engineer, you need to set up the infrastructure required to run our application. Okay, take the code which is done by the developers from source code repository. All the developers will write the code, will keep the code in one location that is called as source code repository. Source code repository. Okay, you need to take the code from the source code repository. What are the source code repositories are available? GitHub, Bitbucket, SVN, GitHub, Bitbucket, SVN or GitHub or Bitbucket. Like that, there are several source code repositories are available in the market. You need to take the code from that source code repository. Once you have taken the code from the repository, you need to build that code using build tools. What are the build tools available in the market? Maven and Gradle. These are the build tools available for Java related applications. Deploy the code by using CI/CD tools. What are the deployment tools available to deploy our project? Jenkins and udeploy. Jenkins and udeploy is available for deployment purpose. Once the project deployment is completed, we need to deliver project to the client. Deliver project to the client. These are roles and responsibilities of DevOps engineers in the company. Are you able to understand? Nowadays, as the companies are using infrastructure from the cloud, being a DevOps engineer, you need to have knowledge on the cloud computing also. Nowadays, companies are preferring cloud infrastructure. Companies are preferring cloud infrastructure. Nowadays, companies are preferring cloud infrastructure to reduce cost and maintenance. Nowadays, companies are preferring cloud infrastructure to reduce cost and maintenance. Being a DevOps engineer, you should know cloud computing also. Being DevOps engineer, you should be having experience with cloud computing also. Being DevOps engineer, you should know cloud platforms also. At least one cloud platform you should know if you want to work as a DevOps engineer in the company. Being a DevOps engineer, you are responsible to set up the infrastructure required for the application. Companies are purchasing the infrastructure. Companies are taking the infrastructure for rent. Companies are taking the infrastructure for rent from the cloud providers. Companies are using cloud platforms to set up the infrastructure. So if you want to work as a DevOps engineer, if you know only DevOps, is it sufficient? If you know only DevOps operations, is it sufficient, guys? Can you tell me? Can you understand the roles and responsibilities of DevOps engineer? If you want to become a DevOps engineer, if you know only DevOps tools, is it sufficient? You should know the cloud platform also. If you want to work as a DevOps engineer in the company, you need to know the cloud platform also, because infrastructure we are going to take from the cloud platform. That is the reason I'm covering this course. I'm calling this course as DevOps with AWS. DevOps is a practice which is used to simplify deployment process of the application. AWS is a cloud platform. By using this AWS, we can take the infrastructure for the rent, and by using this DevOps, we can simplify application deployment process. Okay, now you got the clarity what you are going to become once you learn this DevOps with AWS course. Come on, guys. What you are going to become once you learn this DevOps with AWS course? What would be your duty in the company as a DevOps engineer? You are going to the company as a DevOps engineer to clean the floors, to check the ID cards, or you are going to set up the infrastructure and deploy the project for the client. As a DevOps engineer, you are going to set up the infrastructure required for the project, and you are going to deploy the project, and you are going to deliver. Where you are going to set up the infrastructure, companies are purchasing the infrastructure, or you need to use cloud infrastructure. Companies are purchasing the infrastructure, or you need to use the cloud infrastructure. So now tell me, learning AWS is mandatory for you, or is it optional? Learning AWS is mandatory, or is it optional? It's mandatory. Not only AWS, you need to learn at least one cloud platform, either Azure or GCP or AWS. At least one cloud platform you have to learn if you want to get the job as a DevOps engineer. If you want to get the job as a DevOps engineer, you need to learn at least one cloud platform. As part of our course, which cloud platform we are going to understand? As part of our course, which cloud platform we are going to understand? AWS. So can I call this course as DevOps with AWS? Can I call this course as a DevOps with AWS? DevOps with AWS, you are going to use to deploy and deliver the project to the client. To deploy and deliver the project to the client, we are going to use this DevOps with AWS. DevOps is a practice. DevOps is a practice. AWS is a cloud. AWS is a cloud. In this course, I'm going to cover AWS cloud, not GCP or Azure. The course itself is DevOps with AWS. The course name itself is DevOps with AWS. It is the master program on the DevOps with AWS. After this course is completed, you can keep 3 to 4 years experience as a DevOps with AWS engineer. We are going to learn Linux first. Linux operating system we will learn. Then we will learn the shell scripting in the Linux. Then we will learn AWS cloud. 15 plus services we are going to learn from the AWS. And we are going to learn 10 plus DevOps tools. And we are going to implement some real-time projects also with the different technologies. And resume preparation, interview questions, mock interviews, job profile creation. All these things we are going to cover as part of our course. All these things we are going to cover as part of our course. After completion of this course, you can keep 3 to 4 years of experience. As I mentioned, the daily class timings are 7 p.m. to 8 p.m. IST. Monday to Saturday classes will be available. This course is going to take 3 to 3.5 months because we are learning Linux, shell scripting, AWS, DevOps, and projects. This is the agenda of our course. I'm going to cover the concepts also in the same order. First Linux, then Linux commands, shell scripting, then AWS cloud, then DevOps tools, then the projects we are going to implement. Clear, guys? Fine. So DevOps is a culture which is used to simplify application delivery process. Development plus operations is called as DevOps. Cloud computing, providing on-demand IT resources over the internet is called as cloud computing. Okay, so if you want to set up the infrastructure, it is very costly and time-taking process. Guys, people are asking, is it a demo session? Man, if it is a demo session, will I explain the roles and responsibilities? Will I explain what is cloud computing? Will I explain about the teams? It is not the demo, man. Please understand, these are regular classes. This is part of syllabus. This is part of syllabus. This is part of syllabus. It is not a demo. It is not a demo. I'm telling you what are the roles and responsibilities of the DevOps engineer, and I'm telling you application architecture. This is not a demo. This is not a demo. Okay, these are regular classes only. Fine. So we understand what are the roles and responsibilities of the DevOps engineer. So being a DevOps engineer, you should know cloud platforms also. Okay. Now let's move on to understand application architecture. Application architecture. How applications will be developed. Every application will follow some client server architecture. Client server architecture will be available. Applications will be running in the server, and clients are going to access the applications by using browsers. Every application will follow, every application comes under every web application basically. every web application comes under client server architecture. Client server architecture. Server is a container which is going to run our web application. Server is a container which is going to run our applications, which is going to run our web application. Which is going to run our web application. That means if you want to run one web application, you need to have a server, guys. Every web application comes under client server architecture. Server is a container which is going to run our web application. What are the servers available? You can see Apache Tomcat is one server, WebLogic is one server, WebSphere is one server, Glassfish is one server, Glassfish is one server, IIS is one server, etc. Like that, there are several servers are available in the market which are going to run our web application. Every web application comes under client server architecture. Server is a container which is going to run our web application. Clients nothing but users. Clients means the users who are accessing the application. Client means the user who is accessing web application running in the server. Clients will use browser to access the application running in the server. Are you able to understand? Every web application comes under client server architecture. Server is a container which is going to run our web application. There are several servers available in the market like Apache Tomcat, WebLogic, WebSphere, Glassfish, IIS server is available. All these servers are used to run the Java applications. IIS server is used to run the .NET application. If your application is developed by using Java, then you can use any one of these server to run that application. If your application is developed by using .NET, then we need to use a server called IIS server, which is given by Microsoft. Right. Who is a client? Client means the user who is accessing the web application running in the server. Clients will use a browser to access the application. Clients will use a browser to access the application running in the server. Now here client will be available. Client is going to access the server. Then server is going to send the response. Now client is accessing the server by sending a request. Server is going to send the response to the client. So like this, our web applications are going to work. Now, can you see that you are going to access our Ashok IT website? That means you are going to open a browser. You are going to open a browser and you are going to access our URL. So if you click that URL, what will happen? One browser will open. From that browser, one request will go to the server. Server will send you Ashok IT website as a response. That means you are acting as a client. My application is running in the server. You are acting as a client and my application is running in the server. This is called as client server architecture. This is called as client server architecture. Guys, remember one point. Every web application comes under client server architecture. That means web application is going to run inside the server. Clients are going to access the server. Clients are going to send the request to access the server. Server will process that request and the server will send the response to the client. Let's understand that architecture here. Let's understand that architecture here. Now we are taking one server. I mean, it depends upon your application. If your application is developed by using Java, then there is a server called Apache Tomcat. Inside this server, we are going to keep our application. Inside the server, we are going to keep our application. The process of keeping the application inside the server is called as deployment. is called as deployment. I'm going to take one server. This server is going to install inside one computer. This server will be installed inside one computer. Okay, we'll take one computer. In that computer, we are going to install the server. Inside the server, we are keeping the application. The process of keeping the application inside the server is called as deployment. That is your duty as a DevOps engineer. As a DevOps engineer, you need to deploy the application into server. Once the application is deployed into the servers, then what we need to do? We are going to, some people, clients will be available. Clients will be available. What will happen here? Clients will be available. Now, multiple clients can access our application which is running inside the server. Now, can you understand Facebook application now? How many people are accessing the Facebook application? Can you understand that? How many people are accessing Facebook application? Every client will use one computer, a laptop or a desktop they are using. A laptop or desktop they are using. Inside the laptop or desktop, they will open a browser. They will open a browser. Inside that browser, they are going to type the application URL www.facebook.com or www.flipkart.com. Like this, they are going to open the URLs. They are going to open the URLs. Like this, multiple clients will be available who are going to access our application. How the clients are accessing our application? Clients are going to send the request to the server. Server will process the request, will send the response to the client. Server is going to process the request and will send response to the client. First client is sending a request. Second client is sending a request to the server. Second client is sending a request to the server. Similarly, third client is going to send a request to the server. Multiple people can access our server at a time. So this is how a web application is running in the market. Are you guys getting my point? How web applications are running? Are you guys able to understand how the web applications are running? Come on, guys. Request, response, request, response, request, response. Right? Every client is going to send a request to the server by using some browser. Then server will process the request and the server is going to send the response to the client. This is called as client server architecture. What is this, guys? Client server architecture. Can I say this is a client server architecture now? So can you imagine how the Facebook application is running? How multiple people are able to access the Facebook application at a time? Facebook application is one web application. That web application is running inside a server. The web application is running inside a server. Now, the process of deploying the application into server is called as deployment. As a DevOps engineer, you are responsible to deploy the application to the server. Once your application is deployed to the server, people can access your application by using browser. That means the people who are accessing our application are called as clients. The people who are accessing our application are called as clients. This we can say as a client 1. We can say client 1. Here we can say client 2. And here we can say client 3. Client 1, client 2, client 3, like that multiple clients can access our application at a time. Multiple clients can access our application at a time. How clients are accessing our application? Clients are using browser to access our application. Clients nothing but users who are accessing our application. Clients nothing but users who are accessing our application. Server is a container which is running our application. The process of keeping our application inside the server is called as deployment. Who is responsible for application deployment in the project? Who is responsible to deploy the application? DevOps engineers. Can you guys respond? Who is responsible to deploy the application? DevOps engineer. Who will get the requirements from the client? Guys, tell me. Who will get the requirements from the client? Functional people will get the requirements from the client. Who will develop the project? Who will develop the project? Developers. Who will test the project? Testers. Who will test the project? Testers. Who will deliver the project? Who will deploy and deliver the project? Who will deliver the project to the client? DevOps engineers are going to deliver the project. DevOps engineers are going to deliver the project. Now, you understand how the application is running. You understand how the application is running. What is a client server architecture? What is a client server architecture? Do you get the basic idea? What is a client server architecture? Guys, come on. Please tell me, you understand what is client server architecture? How the application is running? How you are able to access Facebook, Gmail, LinkedIn, Naukri, Ashok IT website? All these are web applications. They are running in the server. You are a client. You are accessing my application by using browser. So in the company, tomorrow, your development team will develop the project. Testing team will test the project. You need to deploy the project into server. That deployment process is your job in the company. As a DevOps engineer, application deployment is your job. Your duty is application deployment process. You have to perform application deployments in the company as a DevOps engineer. Okay. You understood? You understood my point, guys? Come on. Yeah. Right. Let's quickly revise the things that we discussed in the today's session. What we discussed today: functional team is responsible to collect the requirements from the client. Development team is responsible to write the code for the client given requirements. Testing team is responsible to test the code which is done by the developers. Operations team is responsible to build, deploy, and deliver the project to the client. After learning the DevOps with AWS, you will become application operations engineer. That means you are responsible for application build and deployment process. So what are your roles and responsibilities as a DevOps engineer in the company? You need to set up the infrastructure required to run the application. You need to set up the server. You need to set up the database. You need to set up the load balancer. Tomorrow I will talk about what is load balancer, how the load will be distributed now. So here we have one server. If 1 crore people access one server at a time, server will die. How so many people are able to access the Facebook at a time? Why it is responding quickly, even though crores of people accessing the Facebook at a time, how it is running successfully? That's where load balancing comes into picture. In the real time, we will never deploy our application into single server. In the real time, we will never deploy our application into single server. Are you guys able to understand? We will never deploy our application into single server in the real time. So tomorrow we are going to understand how to deploy our application with the load balancer. Very, very, very important topic. Take the code, develop as a DevOps engineer. You need to set up the infrastructure required to run our application. Take the code which is done by the developers from the source code repository by using SVN or GitHub. They will push the code. Build the code by using Maven Gradle. Deploy the code into servers using CI/CD tools. Deliver the project to the client. Nowadays, companies are preferring cloud infrastructure to reduce cost and maintenance. Okay, being a DevOps engineer, you should know cloud platforms also. Application architecture. Every web application comes under client server architecture. Server is a container which is going to run our web application. Apache Tomcat, WebLogic, WebSphere, Glassfish, IIS. Client means the user who is accessing the web application running in the server. Clients will use browser to access the application running in the server. Multiple clients can access the web application at a time. Multiple clients can access web application at a time. Web application at a time. Example, we are using Gmail. We all are using Facebook, Gmail, IRCTC, Ashok IT, etc. All these are web applications. We are using all these applications at a time. If a multiple users are accessing the application, how server will handle the load? If multiple users access the application, then burden will be increased on the server. To reduce the burden on the server, we will use load balancing concept in the real time. To reduce burden on the server, we will use load balancing in the real time. No application will be delivered to the client without load balancing. That is tomorrow's topic. That is our tomorrow's topic. What we are going to discuss tomorrow? Load balancing in the real time. Load balancing for application in the real time. How we are going to use the load balancer? Why we need to use the load balancer? Why this load balancer is required? What are the problems if you don't go for the load balancer? All these topics we are going to discuss in the tomorrow session. Okay, as of now, I have shown you client server architecture. Our application is deployed to one server. If your application is deployed to one server, if 1 crore people access your application at a time, then what is the problem? If our application is deployed to one server, if 1 crore request comes to your server, server cannot handle that load. Server will die. So to overcome this problem, in the real time, we are going to use a concept called load balancing. So tomorrow we are going to understand load balancing topic, guys. Thanks for joining. Have a great week. Great evening. Thank you.